In the cold, calculating world of high-stakes real estate and even higher-stakes marriages, some sins are meant to stay hidden behind polished marble and designer suits. Brendan Doyle, a man who built an empire of glass and steel, believed his power made him untouchable. He thought his pregnant wife, Lena, was just another asset to be managed, and his mistress, Crystal, a glittering upgrade. But what happens when the venomous words meant to crush a wife's spirit are spoken in the wrong place at the wrong time? What happens when the one man with the power to shatter Brendan's entire world is sitting just one table away, listening to every single soul-destroying syllable? This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a story of blinding arrogance and the silent, patient gavel of justice that was about to fall. The scent of lemon and beeswax always reminded Lena of their first year of marriage. Brendan had insisted on a full-time housekeeper for their sprawling penthouse overlooking the city. But Lena cherished the quiet Thursday mornings when the staff was away. She would polish the antique oak table herself, the one Brendan had bought her, as a first anniversary gift, and the familiar clean scent would transport her back to a time when his smiles reached his eyes. Now, in the 7th month of her pregnancy, the scent felt like a ghost. The penthouse, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and panoramic views, had once felt like living in the sky. Now it felt like a cage, albeit a beautifully gilded one. Brendan Doyle wasn't just a husband. He was an event. A force of nature in a bespoke suit, he moved through the world of commercial real estate with the predatory grace of a shark. His company Apex Development was his kingdom, and he was its undisputed king. Lena, a once promising graphic designer, had willingly set her career aside to be his queen. At first it was a fairy tale. He'd courted her with whirlwind trips to Paris, showered her with gifts, and praised her calming presence as the perfect antidote to his high-stress life. The cracks began as hairline fractures, a business dinner she wasn't invited to, a boys' weekend that left his phone mysteriously off for 48 hours. His compliments, once warm and genuine, became transactional. "That dress looks great, Lena. Perfect for the investors' gala." Not, "You look beautiful." The pregnancy, which should have been their shared joy, became the wedge that drove them completely apart. Lena had imagined him tenderly feeling the baby kick, co-designing the nursery, debating names over late-night ice cream. Instead, he saw it as an inconvenience. "Can't you get that tailor to let out your dresses?" he'd snapped one evening as she struggled with a zipper. "We have the Henderson Gala. I can't have you looking bloated." Bloated. The word struck her with the force of a physical slap. She was carrying his child, their son, and he called her bloated. Tonight was another such evening. He was late as usual. The dinner she had carefully prepared, a roasted chicken with rosemary. His favorite sat under a warming lamp in the kitchen, slowly drying out. She rested a hand on her swollen belly, where the baby was restlessly tumbling. "It's okay, little one," she whispered. "Daddy's just busy." But the words tasted like ash. When the key finally turned in the lock at 10 p.m., he entered not with an apology, but with the cold fury of a man interrupted. He was on his phone, his voice a low growl. "No, you tell Peterson that the zoning commission is already in my pocket. If he wants to play hardball, I'll bury his little contracting firm in litigation for the next decade. Settle it." He ended the call and tossed his briefcase onto a pristine cream sofa, not even glancing at her. "Hello, Brendan," Lena said softly, standing up from the armchair. "Lena," he acknowledged, loosening his tie. "You're still up?" "I made dinner. Your favorite." He finally looked at her, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. She was wearing a simple, comfortable maternity dress, her hair pulled back her face, devoid of makeup. His lip curled in a faint, almost imperceptible sneer. I ate already. Had a meeting with the city comptroller. You know how it is. He walked to the bar and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. Oh. Okay. The disappointment was a familiar weight in her chest. How did it go? It went how it always goes. I won. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Listen about the christening. My mother wants it at St. Patrick's Cathedral. She's already making calls. Lena's heart sank a little further. But we talked about the little chapel upstate near where I grew up. It's so beautiful and quiet. Brendan let out a short, humorless laugh. Lena, this isn't a country picnic. This is the christening of Brendan Doyle's son. It's a statement. My partners, my investors, the media, they'll all be there. We're not doing it in some backwoods shack. It's not a shack, Brendan. It's a church. My parents were married there. And look where that got them, he said, cruelly, gesturing vaguely. A small house in a town nobody's ever heard of. My son will have the best, the biggest, the most impressive. End of discussion. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She hated how easily he could wound her. She wrapped her arms around her belly, a protective gesture. Our son doesn't care about St. Patrick's Cathedral, Brendan. He just needs his father. He downed the scotch in one gulp and set the glass down with a sharp click. He walked towards her, his 6-foot frame looming over her. For a terrifying second, she thought he might strike her. Instead, he reached out and touched her stomach with cold, detached fingers. Don't get sentimental. It's unbecoming, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. You're getting emotional. It's the hormones. Just try to keep it together. You have one job right now, produce a healthy male heir. Don't complicate it with feelings. He turned and walked towards their bedroom, stripping off his jacket as he went. I have an early flight to Chicago. Don't wait up. Lena stood alone in the cavernous living room, the city lights twinkling mockingly through the vast windows. The beautiful penthouse was a prison, her marriage a business contract, and her husband a stranger who looked at her with the same cold appraisal he gave a balance sheet. The baby kicked again, a sharp, insistent jab, as if sensing her distress. She knew then with a chilling certainty that froze her to the bone that she couldn't just keep it together. This life was unsustainable. For the sake of her child, she had to find a way out. But how do you escape a king from his own castle? The following afternoon, while Lena was at her obstetrician's appointment, Brendan was in a different part of the city, in a very different kind of meeting. The restaurant was sleek and modern, a place called Verve, where deals were sealed over $30 salads and hushed conversations. His lunch companion was Crystal Parker. Crystal was everything Lena was not, sharp, ambitious, and dressed in a tailored crimson dress that clung to her gym-honed body. She was a vice president at a rival development firm. For months, she had been both Brendan's fiercest competitor in business and his most enthusiastic partner in infidelity. Her hair was a severe black bob, her lipstick the color of her dress, and her laughter was as sharp and bright as shattering glass. So the old man finally folded, Crystal asked, taking a delicate sip of her Prosecco. Peterson, he didn't have a choice, Brendan said, basking in her admiration. I had him cornered. The zoning variance is mine. The entire West Bank project is greenlit. To the king, she purred, raising her glass. He clinked it, a smug smile playing on his lips. This was the validation he craved, not the quiet, unconditional love Lena offered, but the breathless worship of his power. The king is tired, Crystal. The situation at home is draining. He sighed dramatically, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. Crystal's eyes narrowed with predatory interest. Lena, Is she still moping about? Worse, she's nesting, he said with a shudder of theatrical disgust. Waddling around the apartment, talking about feelings and rustic chapels. She's becoming her mother. Soft. Weak. She doesn't understand the world we live in. Poor baby. Crystal said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her nails were long and painted a glossy black. Having to go home to that every night, after all the pressure you're under. It's the pregnancy, Brendan continued, emboldened by her support. It's made her unattractive, not just physically, but her whole demeanor, this constant neediness. And she's so naive. She still thinks this is some great love story. Well, you are a very convincing actor, Crystal complimented him. I had to be, he admitted. Her family had old money connections. Nothing major, but her uncle sits on the board of the Historical Preservation Society. I needed his vote to get the downtown library project demolished. Lena was the key. A charming, artsy wife to smooth things over. And she played her part perfectly. And now the part's over. Crystal asked, her voice a silky whisper. Brendan leaned forward, his voice dropping. The part is almost over. The ink is dry on the library deal. The heir is almost here. Once the boy is born and my mother is satisfied, Lena's utility is diminished. The cold corporate language he used to describe his wife and unborn child sent a shiver of pleasure through Crystal. This was the man she wanted. Ruthless, unsentimental, a winner. So what's the plan? She pressed. You can't just throw a new mother out on the street. Even you have to worry about optics, Brendan. The plan, he said, savoring the moment, is to establish a narrative. I'm already laying the groundwork. She's emotionally unstable, hormonal, difficult. After the birth, I'll suggest she's suffering from postpartum depression. Severe postpartum. I'll be the concerned, supportive husband, trying to get her help while she becomes increasingly erratic. And this erratic behavior will eventually lead to divorce papers. Exactly. I'll be the victim. The long-suffering husband who just wanted to keep his family together. I'll give her a settlement, of course. Something that looks generous to the public, but is a pittance to me. Enough to keep her quiet and get her a nice little apartment somewhere far away. I get full custody of my son naturally. I can't have him raised by someone so fragile. Crystal's smile was predatory. It's brilliant. Diabolical, but brilliant. It's just business, he said with a shrug. Marriage, like any other partnership, is about maximizing value. When one partner ceases to add value, you divest. He flagged down the waiter. 2 more Proseccos. We're celebrating. As the waiter left, Crystal leaned in even closer, her scent something expensive and spicy filling the space between them. And once you've divested, where does that leave me? Brendan's eyes gleamed. The Queen is dead. Long live the Queen. He imagined the future. Crystal on his arm at galas, a woman who understood power and ambition. A partner, not a liability. His son raised in his image, unburdened by Lena's soft-hearted sentimentality. It was perfect. A clean, efficient extraction. He had all the money, all the power, and the best lawyers in the city on retainer. Lena wouldn't stand a chance. She was an emotional pregnant woman with no job and no resources. He felt a surge of triumph. He was Brendan Doyle. He always won. Little did he know the game he was playing was far more complex than he imagined, and the most important player was one he hadn't even noticed. 2 weeks later, Lena's world had shrunk to the size of her own suffocating anxiety. Brendan's cruelty had escalated, his comments becoming more frequent and more cutting. He openly took calls from Crystal in front of her, labeling them Business, his tone shifting from bored indifference with Lena to animated excitement with the woman on the other end of the line. The final straw had come that morning. Lena had found a receipt from a high-end jewelry store crumpled in his coat pocket. It was for a diamond tennis bracelet purchased 2 days prior. It certainly wasn't for her. Her hands shaking, she had finally made the call she'd been dreading for months. "Chloe, it's Lina." Chloe Preston was her oldest friend, a sharp-witted, no-nonsense public defender who had warned her about Brendan from the start. "He looks at you like a prize, Liv, not a person," she'd said years ago. Lena hadn't listened. "Liv, you okay? You sound awful." Chloe's voice crackled with concern. "Can we meet? I need a lawyer." The words felt like a betrayal and a liberation all at once. They agreed to meet at the Gavel Stop, a small, unassuming cafe across the street from the main county courthouse. It was a neutral ground, always bustling with lawyers, clerks, and jurors on their lunch breaks. Lena arrived early, her coat pulled tight around her, despite the mild autumn air. She felt exposed, her pregnant belly like a giant sign broadcasting her vulnerability. She ordered a chamomile tea and sat at a small table in the corner, trying to make herself invisible. The cafe was crowded, the air thick with the smell of coffee and the low hum of 100 different conversations. She was watching the door for Chloe when a familiar, jarring laugh cut through the noise. Her blood ran cold. Brendan, looking impossibly handsome and relaxed in a grey cashmere sweater, was walking in. And on his arm, clinging to him with a proprietary air, was a striking woman with a severe black bob and a crimson coat. On the woman's wrist, flashing under the cafe lights, was a new diamond tennis bracelet. Lena felt the air leave her lungs. She instinctively tried to shrink behind a large potted fern, her heart hammering against her ribs. They hadn't seen her. They chose a table near the center of the room, oblivious to her presence. Sitting at the table directly behind Brendan's with his back to them was an older gentleman. He looked to be in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a tired but intelligent face. He was dressed in a simple, slightly rumpled tweed jacket and was quietly reading a thick legal brief, a half-eaten sandwich on a plate beside him. He seemed completely absorbed, just another part of the cafe's scenery. Then Brendan started talking, his voice carrying in the noisy room with the easy confidence of a man who assumes he is the most important person there. "I'm telling you, Crystal, it's a work of art," Brendan said loud enough for several tables to hear. "The narrative is perfect. The unstable hormonal wife. Everyone sees it. My own mother is worried about her fragile state." Crystal giggled a high, tinny sound. "And how is dear Lena? Is she still crying over paint swatches for the nursery?" From her corner, Lena felt a wave of nausea. She wanted to run, but her feet felt bolted to the floor. She was trapped, forced to listen to her own character assassination. Brendan leaned in conspiratorially, though his voice was still far from a whisper. "Oh, it's pathetic. Last night she actually tried to talk to me about our emotional connection. I swear the baby has sucked out what little brains she had. She just waddles around the penthouse, sighing. It's like living with a sad, pregnant manatee." Crystal shrieked with laughter, covering her mouth with a perfectly manicured hand. "A manatee, Brendan. You're wicked. It's the truth," he boomed, enjoying being the center of attention. "And the way she looks. God, I'm doing a public service by staying with her through this. But once the kid is out, my tour of duty is over. I'll have my lawyer, Robert Peterson, the best in the business, serve her the papers in the hospital. Can you imagine? Congratulations on the baby, Mrs. Doyle. By the way, your husband is divorcing you and suing for full custody." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Lena pressed her hands against her mouth to stifle a sob, tears streaming silently down her face. Behind Brendan, The older man in the tweed jacket, Judge Arthur Finnegan, paused in his reading. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the man's voice was impossible to ignore. His eyes, sharp and discerning over the top of his reading glasses, flickered for a moment. He slowly, deliberately folded the corner of the page he was on. He didn't turn around. He didn't react. He simply took a slow sip of his water, his gaze distant. But he was no longer reading. He was listening. And she'll have no leg to stand on. Brendan continued, his ego swelling. She has no job, no money of her own. She signed a prenup, tighter than a drum. I'll paint her as an unfit mother. My resources against hers. It's not even a fight. It's an execution. And the baby, Crystal asked. My son, my heir. He'll be raised by me with a proper role model, he said, squeezing Crystal's hand. Someone strong and smart, not some weeping, sentimental fool who thinks love can pay the bills. Just then, Chloe Preston walked in. She spotted Lena, instantly saw her tear-streaked face and the direction of her terrified gaze. Her eyes followed Lena's and landed on Brendan and Crystal. Chloe's friendly expression hardened into a mask of cold fury. She strode over to Lena's table. "We're leaving," she said in a low, firm voice. Her voice was just loud enough to carry. Brendan turned. His face, flushed with laughter, froze when he saw Lena. For a split second, a flicker of panic crossed his features, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, arrogant mask. He gave a slight dismissive nod, as if acknowledging a subordinate, then deliberately turned back to Crystal, laughing at something she said. The dismissal was more painful than any insult. Chloe wrapped a protective arm around Lena, helping her to her feet. As they walked past the judge's table towards the exit, Lena stumbled, and a small, choked sob escaped her. Judge Finnegan looked up, his eyes meeting Lena's for a brief, fleeting moment. There was no pity in his expression. There was something else, something harder to define. It was a look of deep, profound contemplation, the look of a man fitting a piece into a very complex puzzle. He watched them leave, then his gaze shifted back to the oblivious man in the cashmere sweater who was now showing his mistress something on his phone. The judge slowly picked up his sandwich, his decision made. The law, he knew, was not just about facts and statutes. It was about character. And he had just been given a clearer window into Brendan Doyle's character than any deposition could ever provide. Judge Arthur Finnegan was a man of habit and precision. For 40 years he had served the bench, first as a prosecutor, then as a judge in the family courts, and for the last decade in the far more complex and murky world of corporate and financial litigation. He was known for his sharp intellect, his impatience with theatrical lawyers, and his almost unnerving ability to see through deception. His colleagues called him Silent Finnegan, because he rarely spoke during proceedings, preferring to listen, watch, and absorb, only interjecting with a question so precise it could dismantle an entire argument. Back in his chambers, the institutional quiet a stark contrast to the cafe's clatter, Judge Finnegan sat at his large mahogany desk. The half-eaten sandwich was forgotten in its wrapper in his wastebasket. He stared out the window at the bustling city below, but he wasn't seeing the traffic. He was replaying the scene from the cafe, the words echoing in his mind, like living with a sad, pregnant manatee. Serve her the papers in the hospital? It's not even a fight. It's an execution. He had seen arrogance in his courtroom countless times. It was the native language of the powerful and the wealthy. But this had been different. This was not posturing for a jury or a rival attorney. This was the man's unvarnished soul revealed in what he thought was a private moment. The casual cruelty, the gleeful plotting against the mother of his unborn child. It spoke of a profound character rot. He turned back to his desk, to the very legal brief he had been reading at the cafe. The name on the cover page seemed to leap out at him in stark, bold letters. Motion to dismiss Peterson versus State Regulatory Board on behalf of Apex Development. The petitioner, Apex Development. CEO, Brendan Doyle. Judge Finnegan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. It wasn't a coincidence. It was providence. The case on his desk was a fraud investigation. Several subcontractors and investors had filed a complaint against Apex Development, alleging a massive scheme involving fraudulent invoices, shell corporations, and substandard materials used in several large-scale building projects, including the recently approved West Bank venture. They claimed Brendan Doyle had built his empire on a foundation of lies, cheating them out of millions. Brendan's lawyer, a notoriously aggressive attorney named Robert Peterson, the same man Brendan had boasted about hiring to execute his wife, had filed a motion to have the entire case dismissed, claiming it was a frivolous shakedown by disgruntled competitors. Until an hour ago, Judge Finnegan had been leaning towards granting a partial dismissal, finding some of the claims to be weakly substantiated. Now he saw the case in a new light. A man who would so callously and meticulously plot to defraud his own wife of her child and dignity was more than capable of defrauding his business partners. The mindset was the same, a contempt for others, a belief in his own superiority, and a willingness to use any means necessary to win. His personal depravity was a powerful indicator of his professional ethics, or lack thereof. The judge picked up the phone and buzzed his clerk. "Jessica, get me the full discovery file on the Apex Development case. I want every deposition, every financial statement, every email chain. And cancel my afternoon appointments. I'm going to be reading." He wasn't going to let his personal impression dictate his legal ruling. He was far too principled for that. But the man's overheard confession was a key, a Rosetta Stone that would help him decipher the complex, obfuscated language of the financial documents. He now knew what to look for: the patterns of deception, the arrogance that would lead a man to believe he could get away with anything. Meanwhile, in Chloe Preston's cramped, paper-strewn office at the Public Defender's building, Lena was huddled in a chair clutching a mug of hot tea Chloe had forced into her trembling hands. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a deep, shuddering anger. "He called me a manatee." She whispered the absurdity of it, cutting through her grief. He was laughing. "He's a monster, Liv," Chloe said, her voice hard as steel. "But monsters can be beaten. We just have to be smarter than him." "How?" Lena asked, her voice cracking. "He's right. He has all the money. He has the best lawyer. He has that prenup." Chloe leaned forward, her eyes blazing with intensity. "The prenup. Let me see it. You kept a copy, right?" Lena nodded, fumbling in her purse for a folded set of documents she'd had the foresight to take from the penthouse safe that morning. Chloe spread the pages on her desk, her finger tracing the dense legal text. "Okay. Standard stuff," Chloe muttered. "Waiver of spousal support, division of assets acquired before the marriage. But look here." She pointed to a clause. "Section 7, subsection B. It states that all protections afforded to Mr. Doyle are rendered null and void in the event of proven material fraud or criminal misconduct that financially impacts the marital estate." Lena looked at her confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," Chloe said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face, "that if we can prove he's a crook in his business, this entire prenup is nothing but toilet paper. If his company's assets are based on fraud, then the marital estate he's trying to protect is also fraudulent. He can't use a contract to shield assets he acquired illegally." A tiny spark of hope flickered in Lena's chest. "But how do we prove that it's his word against, well, nobody's?" Not nobody's, Chloe countered. Yours. You lived with him. You saw things, heard things. Think live. Late-night phone calls, strange documents left on his desk. Names of companies you didn't recognize. Lena's mind raced, pushing past the pain and focusing. She thought about the endless nights he'd spent in his home office, the hushed, angry phone calls, the way he would quickly shut his laptop whenever she entered the room. There were ledgers, she said, slowly, a memory surfacing. A few months ago he was working on these strange spreadsheets. They weren't from his main accounting software. It looked older, simpler. And the names of the holding companies, Odyssey Holdings, Viridian Properties. I remember thinking they sounded like something from a spy movie. Chloe's eyes lit up. Shell corporations, a classic way to move money around, hide profits, and pay for things off the books. Where are they? I don't know, Lena said, her hope deflating. Probably on a hard drive in his office safe. Okay, that's a start, Chloe said, scribbling furiously on a legal pad. We can't get to that yet, but we can file for divorce immediately. We'll file on grounds of extreme cruelty. We'll petition for a temporary restraining order to keep him away from you, and we will immediately file a motion to freeze his personal assets, pending a full financial discovery. And we will subpoena every single document related to Odyssey Holdings and Viridian Properties. He'll fight it, Lena whispered. Let him fight, Chloe said, her voice ringing with confidence. He's expecting a scared hormonal victim. He's not expecting a fight. He's not expecting us. And he has no idea that the world is much smaller than he thinks. Unbeknownst to them both in his quiet chambers just a few blocks away, a judge was already connecting the dots. The unseen witness had become an unseen ally, and the gears of justice, though slow and silent, had begun to turn. The first legal salvo was fired the next morning. Robert Peterson Brendan's attorney received the filing from Chloe's office. He was a portly man with a florid face and a reputation for crushing opponents with nuisance motions and burying them in paperwork. He scanned the documents with a dismissive smirk. Extreme cruelty, please, he muttered to his junior associate. It's a boilerplate filing from a public defender who's in over her head, and a motion to freeze his assets audacious. Brendan, when informed, was enraged. She's doing what? On what grounds? Freeze my assets. I'll ruin this Chloe Preston. I'll have her disbarred for filing such a frivolous suit. Calm down, Brendan, Peterson advised smoothly over the phone. This is what they do. It's a scare tactic. They're trying to get a quick, generous settlement. We'll file a counter-motion, get this nonsense thrown out, and proceed as planned. Don't worry, the judge will see this for what it is. But the judge didn't. The motion to freeze Brendan's personal assets landed by standard court assignment on the desk of Judge Arthur Finnegan. He recognized the names instantly, Lena Doyle versus Brendan Doyle. He read Chloe's petition carefully. It was lean-aggressive and pointed directly at the possibility of financial malfeasance, specifically mentioning Odyssey Holdings and Viridian Properties. Peterson's counter-motion was arrogant and dismissive. It portrayed Lena as a vindictive, unstable woman lashing out. Normally, a judge might be inclined to agree to see it as a typical messy divorce tactic. But Judge Finnegan knew what he had heard in the cafe. He knew Brendan's own words confirmed the extreme cruelty and his intent to leave his wife destitute. That provided context. That made Lena's claims credible. He took his pen and, in a firm, decisive hand, he wrote 2 words on Peterson's counter-motion, denied. He then signed the order for a temporary freeze on all of Brendan Doyle's personal accounts, pending a full hearing. When Peterson received the ruling, he was flabbergasted. Denied on what grounds? Finnegan is usually a stickler for evidence. This is highly irregular. Brendan was incandescent with rage. What do you mean, denied? My accounts are frozen. I have a business to run. Unfreeze them. It's temporary, Brendan. Peterson set a bead of sweat on his brow. We have a hearing next week. I'll argue it then. It's a minor setback. But it wasn't minor. The asset freeze sent a ripple of alarm through Brendan's financial world. A multi-million-dollar wire transfer for the West Bank project was halted. Creditors got nervous. The first crack had appeared in the facade of his empire. Next came the discovery phase. Chloe, empowered by the initial ruling, sent a sweeping subpoena for all documents related to the two shell companies. Peterson fought back, filing a motion for a protective order, claiming the request was an irrelevant and malicious fishing expedition designed to harass his client and disrupt his legitimate business. It's a divorce proceeding. Your Honor, not a corporate audit. Peterson argued in a preliminary hearing a week later, his voice booming across the small courtroom. Ms. Preston is attempting to litigate a business dispute in a family court. Judge Finnegan, presiding over the hearing, looked down from the bench, his face impassive. Ms. Preston, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying immense authority. Your response? Chloe stood calm and prepared. Your Honor, the integrity of the marital estate is at the very heart of this divorce. My client has reason to believe that marital assets were funneled through these entities to devalue the community property she is entitled to. Furthermore, the prenup, which Mr. Peterson's client is so keen to enforce, contains a fraud clause. We cannot determine the validity of that contract without examining the very entities we believe were used to commit said fraud. It was a brilliant legal argument, linking the divorce, the prenup, and the corporate entities in an unbreakable chain. Judge Finnegan listened, his fingers steepled. He already knew from the other case on his docket that those entities were highly suspicious. He looked at Brendan, who was sitting beside his lawyer, radiating arrogant impatience. Mr. Peterson, the judge said calmly, if your client's business is, as you say, legitimate, then he should have no problem producing documents that prove it. A transparent man has nothing to fear from the light. Motion for a protective order is denied. You will produce the requested documents within 10 business days. Failure to comply will be met with sanctions. Peterson's jaw dropped. Brendan's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He had expected the courts to be his playground, a place where his power and money would ensure victory. Instead, a quiet, inscrutable judge was siding with a public defender and his hysterical wife at every turn. This is a witch hunt, Brendan hissed to his lawyer as they left the courtroom. What is wrong with that judge? Does he have a grudge against me? I don't know, Peterson admitted, looking genuinely rattled for the first time. I've argued before Finnegan dozens of times. I've never seen him like this. It's like he's 2 steps ahead of us. The pressure began to mount. The frozen assets were choking his cash flow. The impending discovery demand was a ticking time bomb. The documents Chloe had asked for would expose the entire fraudulent enterprise. He couldn't hand them over, but defying a direct court order from Judge Finnegan was professional suicide. His paranoia grew. He started to believe Lena had more information than she was letting on. He had the penthouse swept for bugs. He accused his own staff of spying for her. His composure, once his greatest asset, began to fray. Crystal, seeing the cracks appear, began to distance herself. Her calls became less frequent. She was busy, she said. The allure of his power was fading as the reality of his problems grew. The crimson dress and dazzling smile were for a winner, not for a man mired in legal trouble with a frozen bank account. One evening, backed into a corner, Brendan made a fatal error. He ordered his CFO to create a second set of books for Odyssey and Viridian doctored documents to hand over to the court, hiding the illicit transactions. He would commit perjury and obstruction of justice to save himself. It was a desperate, arrogant gamble, born from a lifetime of believing he was untouchable. He was sure he could fool the court, fool the judge, and crush Lena once and for all. He failed to understand that he wasn't just fighting his wife anymore. He was fighting a judge who had already seen his soul. The day of the hearing was grey and overcast, the sky threatening a storm that mirrored the tension brewing in courtroom 4B of the county courthouse. This was not the final divorce trial, but a critical evidentiary hearing. On the table were two primary issues: the continued freezing of Brendan's assets and Peterson's motion to sanction Chloe for her bad faith legal tactics. But everyone in the room knew it was about more than that. It was the first true battle in the war. Brendan arrived flanked by a team of 3 lawyers led by Robert Peterson. He looked haggard, the stress of the past few weeks having etched fine lines around his eyes, but his suit was immaculate, his posture defiant. He shot a look of pure venom at Lena, who sat at the opposing table with Chloe. Lena met his gaze, her hand resting on her belly. For the first time, there was no fear in her eyes, only a cold, quiet resolve. Judge Finnegan entered, and the room fell silent. He settled into his chair, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom before landing on the stacks of documents before him. These were the doctored financials Brendan had submitted for Odyssey Holdings and Viridian Properties. Peterson began, his voice smooth and confident, launching into a long-winded argument about his client's stellar business reputation and the irreparable harm being caused by the asset freeze. Your Honor, we have complied. We have produced the documents. And as they clearly show, these are legitimate holding companies. Ms. Preston's allegations are baseless, a fantasy cooked up to extort a larger settlement from a successful, hard-working man. Judge Finnegan listened without expression, letting Peterson talk for nearly 20 minutes. When he finished, the judge turned his calm gaze to Chloe. Ms. Preston, anything to add? Yes, Your Honor, Chloe said, standing. We believe the documents Mr. Doyle has provided are a work of fiction, a fabrication designed to obstruct justice. Peterson leaped to his feet. Objection, counsel is making outrageous and unsubstantiated claims. Sit down, Mr. Peterson. Judge Finnegan said, his voice dropping an octave. The command was so sharp, so cold, that Peterson physically flinched and sat. The judge looked back at Chloe. A bold claim, Miss Preston. Do you have anything to support it? I do, Your Honor. Chloe walked to the clerk and handed over a single slim folder. Last week, my client, Ms. Doyle, was packing her personal belongings from the marital home under supervised visitation. In a box of old art school portfolios in a storage closet, she found this. She projected the contents onto the courtroom screens. It was a USB drive. This drive contains my client's graphic design portfolio from nearly a decade ago. But it also contains something else. A hidden password-protected folder. My client remembered her husband frequently borrowing this drive years ago, before he bought dedicated external hard drives for his work. He told her it was for some old files. The password, as it turns out, was the name of his first dog, Ruckus. Inside that folder, we found the original unadulterated ledgers for Odyssey Holdings and Viridian Properties, from their inception until 2 years ago. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Brendan's face went white as a sheet. He had forgotten all about the old drive, a relic from a time before he had a state-of-the-art encrypted server. It was the ultimate rookie mistake, born from pure arrogance. Chloe continued, her voice ringing with triumph. These original ledgers, which we have had authenticated by a forensic accountant, tell a very different story from the documents Mr. Doyle submitted. They detail millions of dollars in payments to unlisted subcontractors, transfers to offshore accounts, and payments for non-business expenses. For example, she clicked to a new page. On October 26th, we see a payment of $25,000 from the Odyssey Holdings account to a premium jewelry store. The very next day, a woman named Crystal Parker was seen wearing a new diamond bracelet at a restaurant with Mr. Doyle. The judge's eyes flickered towards Brendan, a spark of recognition in them. More importantly, Chloe pressed on. These ledgers show a systematic pattern of paying for substandard materials like cheaper steel rebar and faulty concrete mix, while invoicing the primary investors for top-grade supplies. This isn't just a case of hiding marital assets, Your Honor. This is the blueprint for the corporate fraud case currently pending against Apex Development. It was the kill shot. Chloe had just connected the divorce proceeding directly to the larger, far more serious criminal investigation. Judge Finnegan looked down at Brendan, his face a mask of cold fury. "Mr. Doyle," he began, his voice dangerously soft, "I am holding in my hands a set of documents you submitted to this court under penalty of perjury, and on the screen I am seeing evidence that they are forgeries. Before I continue, is there anything you'd like to say?" Brendan was speechless, his mind reeling. Peterson tried to intervene. "Your Honor, we contest the provenance of that flash drive." "Be silent, Mr. Peterson, or I will hold you in contempt," Finnegan snapped. He focused again on Brendan. "I'm going to tell you a story, Mr. Doyle, about a man in a cafe. A man so full of himself that he sat in a public place and loudly boasted to his mistress about how he was going to destroy his pregnant wife. He called her a sad, pregnant manatee. He detailed his plan to serve her divorce papers in the hospital and take her child, leaving her with nothing. He laughed about her pain." A wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. Lena stared at the judge, tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness, but of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. Brendan looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. "That man," Judge Finnegan continued, his voice rising with righteous anger, "showed a character of such profound moral depravity that it informed every document I have read since. It gave context to his greed, his lies, and his willingness to defraud anyone to get what he wants, be it his business partners or his own family. You didn't just lie to your wife, Mr. Doyle. You submitted fraudulent documents to my court. You committed perjury. You obstructed justice." The judge raised his gavel. "The temporary asset freeze is now permanent. I am awarding Ms. Doyle exclusive use of the marital home and full temporary custody of the unborn child, with a supervised visitation schedule for Mr. Doyle to be determined at a later date. I am ruling that the prenuptial agreement is void due to clear evidence of criminal fraud, and I am referring this entire matter, the ledgers, the forged documents, and a transcript of today's proceedings to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation into perjury, obstruction of justice, and corporate fraud." He brought the gavel down with a deafening crack. Bang! "Furthermore, Mr. Doyle, given your blatant contempt for the legal process and the overwhelming evidence of your willingness to deceive, I find you to be a significant flight risk. Bailiffs, take this man into custody." Two uniformed officers moved towards a stunned Brendan, his arrogance finally shattered, replaced by raw primal fear. "No, you can't," he stammered, looking wildly at his lawyer. "Peterson, do something." But Peterson was already packing his briefcase, distancing himself from the imploding wreckage of his client. The bailiffs took Brendan by the arms, his expensive suit rumpling, as they cuffed his hands behind his back. As they led him away, his eyes met Lena's one last time. There was no anger, no bravado, only the pathetic, pleading look of a king who had just been dethroned. Lena simply held his gaze, her expression unreadable, before turning away to let Chloe lead her from the courtroom, a free woman walking toward a new dawn. 6 months later, the city was moving into the warmth of spring. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom in the park, across from Lena's new apartment. It was smaller than the penthouse, of course, a cozy 2-bedroom with warm hardwood floors and big windows that let in the morning sun. It didn't have a panoramic view of the city skyline, but it had a view of children playing on swings, and to Lena that was infinitely better. It was not a cage, it was a home. In a small, beautifully decorated nursery, painted a soft sage green, a baby girl named Lily cooed in her crib. She had Lena's calm eyes and a stubborn little tuft of dark hair. Lena leaned over and gently stroked her cheek, a wave of love so fierce and pure washing over her that it still sometimes took her breath away. This tiny, perfect person was the reason for everything, the reason she had found the strength to fight, and the reason her future felt so bright. Brendan Doyle's world, in contrast, had crumbled to dust. Convicted of corporate fraud, perjury, and obstruction of justice, he had been sentenced to 10 to 15 years in a federal prison. His appeals were exhausted. Apex Development had been dismantled by receivers, its assets liquidated, to pay off the legions of creditors and defrauded investors he had left in his wake. The Doyle empire was no more. Robert Peterson had been censured by the bar for his role in the affair, his reputation shredded. And Crystal Parker, the would-be queen, had vanished at the first sign of real trouble, her testimony for the prosecution bought in exchange for immunity. She was last seen working for a real estate firm in Dubai, a world away from the mess she had helped create. The divorce settlement, unencumbered by the voided prenup, had been substantial. Lena didn't want his blood money, but Chloe had been pragmatic. "This isn't for you, Liv," she'd argued. "It's for Lily. It's her birthright, the resources her father tried to steal from you both. Use it to build a life he can never touch." And she had. She used the money to secure her and Lily's future, setting up a trust for her daughter's education. She also used a portion of it to start her own small graphic design firm, Viridian Design, a name she chose with a touch of irony and defiance. She specialized in working with non-profits and small ethical startups, finding fulfillment in using her creativity for good. Her days were filled with client meetings, design proofs, and the sweet scent of baby powder. The ghost of lemon and beeswax was finally gone. Chloe stopped by that afternoon, bearing coffee and pastries. She peered into the nursery at the sleeping baby. "Look at her," she whispered, completely unaware that she's the richest baby in the public defender's social circle. Lena laughed, a real unburdened sound. "She's just the happiest, that's all that matters." They sat in the living room, the sunlight streaming in. On the wall was a large, abstract painting. Lena had recently completed a swirl of brilliant, hopeful colors. "Have you heard from him?" Chloe asked gently. Lena shook her head. "His mother sends a card on the 1st of every month. No note, just a generic, thinking of you card. I think it's her way of trying to maintain some connection, but there's nothing left to connect to." She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. "You know, for a long time, I felt guilty. I wondered if I had been too harsh, if I had ruined his life." "You didn't ruin his life, Liv," Chloe said firmly. "He did. You just turned on the lights, so everyone could see the mess he'd made in the dark. There's a difference." Lena nodded, knowing her friend was right. She thought of Judge Arthur Finnegan, the silent witness to her lowest moment. She had sent him a simple anonymous thank you card after the trial with a picture of a single blooming lily. She never knew if he received it, but she hoped he understood the depth of her gratitude. He hadn't just given her justice. He had restored her faith that character in the end truly matters. Looking at her daughter, at the life she had built from the ashes of her old one, Lena felt a profound sense of peace. The pain of Brendan's betrayal would always be a part of her story, a scar to remind her of her own strength. But it no longer defined her. She was not a victim, a manatee, or a discarded asset. She was a mother, an artist, a business owner, a survivor. She was the architect of her own foundation, one built not on glass and steel, but on resilience, love, and the quiet, unshakable strength she had found within herself. Lena's journey from a gilded cage of despair to a sunlit home of her own is a powerful testament to the fact that true strength isn't about wealth or power, but about resilience and character. Brendan Doyle believed his influence made him invincible, but he forgot that the world is full of unseen witnesses and that our private cruelties can have very public consequences. The quiet integrity of one man, Judge Finnegan, and the fierce loyalty of a friend like Chloe became the catalysts for a justice that was as swift as it was deserved. If you were moved by Lana's story of quiet strength and believe that karma in one form or another eventually finds us all, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is hope. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life stories of betrayal, justice, and the incredible power of the human spirit to overcome. What did you think of Brendan's downfall? Let us know in the comments below.